All right, I got a confession to make. I love Disney movies. I always have, I always will. Something about the combination of music, humor, and in many cases, historical situations make these movies awesome. I have many memories as a kid watching a number of different Disney movies and learning a lot about different cultures. One example of this was the movie Mulan, a movie I saw for the first time in theaters and watched it all throughout my childhood. And while it's not 100% accurate, actually nowhere close, it does give a really interesting portrayal of Chinese culture. One quote from the movie really stands out when Mushu the dragon gets frustrated with Mulan and says, "Dishonor on you, dishonor on your cow, dishonor on your whole family." That idea of honor is foundational to ancient China and Chinese society even today. We'll unpack that and more today. Let's go. Chinese civilizations were some of the oldest and most successful in the ancient world. It's important to recognize that they were secluded from all the other civilizations we've been talking about because of their geography. Surrounded by the Tianshan and the Himalayan mountains in the west, the Gobi Desert in the north, jungles in the south, and the Pacific Ocean in the east, China was one of the most separated civilizations of the ancient world. Being surrounded by these natural barriers, China didn't have many contacts with the outside world. It's because of this that early Chinese civilians called themselves the Middle Kingdom. They believed that they were the center of the universe. China did have two very important river valleys, the Huanghe, or the Yellow River Valley, and the Yangtze River Valley. Once again, river valleys are the foundation of early civilizations, and that's true for China as well. Chinese civilization truly starts in the Yellow River Valley when people began to learn how to farm. And from here emerges China's first ruling dynasty or ruling family, the Shang Dynasty. The Shang ruled from about 1600 BC to 10,000 BC and provide the basics of a social structure and system that would be copied by many Chinese dynasties to come. The Shang people were polytheistic, believing that the gods had created them but were actually relatively secluded from the people. And only certain people, such as the kings or those who were highly honored, had access to the gods. Because of this, early China was organized into clans, groups of families who were believed to share the same ancestry or a specific ancestor who was often mythical or even a god. This created a very intense focus on the importance of family and the importance of honoring the family, which we'll unpack more in a little bit. There was also a focus on balance between good and evil, light and dark, all of these tropes that become a big part of Chinese civilization moving on. And early in the Shang Dynasty, there were a number of advancements that really puts China ahead of some of the rest of the world. The Shang Dynasty arguably created the world's first form of writing, carving and writing on animal bones or turtle shells called oracle bones. This evolved into a written system that featured thousands of written characters that could be put together to create words, as well as an art form known as calligraphy, or fine, fancy handwriting. In addition to that, early China made use of iron tools and weapons, allowing them to have an advantage over invaders and other farmers around the world. These advancements would be continued by the Zhou dynasty, which took over in about 10,000 BC and ruled to about 256 BC. The Zhou were a little bit more warlike, and when they conquered the Shang people, they brought a bigger focus to Chinese expansion. But in order to justify this rebellion and attack on the Shang people, the Zhou used a concept called the Mandate of Heaven to back up their actions. According to the Mandate of Heaven, the gods specifically selected who would rule. Therefore, the Zhou were in the favor of the gods, or at least that's what they said. This also backed up a concept called the Dynastic Cycle, or the rise and fall of ruling families. It specifically meant that families would rise and fall based on the god's will. And that if things were going good in a ruling dynasty, that's because they had the favor of the gods. But if a dynasty fell to military conquest or faced famine or other challenges, that was a result of disfavor with the gods. And this is a theme that will be used to discuss the rise and fall of many different Chinese dynasties throughout the rest of history. The Zhou people also brought a much stronger central government. And in order to keep its power, it divided up the land into small states that different families or clans would work on and produce food and other resources to give back to the Zhou. This is an early form of feudalism, something that will come up again and again in world history. Economically, China booms under the Zhou. Much of this is because of their ironworking, as well as some new technologies and resources as well. The Zhou were the first to create the concept of books. Rather than using scrolls, they put all the information in one handy book. They also began using silk from silkworms to create fine woven materials that could be traded. Much like Persia, the Zhou also created a form of currency of metal coins that could be used for exchange. And overall, this allowed the Zhou to really economically grow and be one of China's most powerful early dynasties. By the end of the Zhou dynasty, China is the most powerful civilization in Asia, but again, relatively untouched by the rest of the world. And much like India, which we unpacked on our last video, the most important thing about ancient China are the worldviews that are exhibited there. The first worldviews come from a man named Confucius, a philosopher and court official in the Zhou dynasty who was concerned about the use of violence and all of the other inequalities within Zhou China. His philosophy or organized system of beliefs was all about worldly things, specifically how to create and maintain peace and harmony among people. So Confucianism wasn't exactly a religion. There wasn't anything worshipped and there was nothing about salvation. It was more so just a way to live life. Confucius believed that peace and harmony in a society could be reached when people not only recognize their place in society, but also recognize the importance of the relationships they have. And for Confucius, there were 5 relationships that were the most important. Father to son, older brother to younger brother, husband to wife, ruler to subject, and friend to friend. Confucius believed that all of these relationships were actually unequal, with the exception of friendship. So according to Confucius, you need to recognize that there are people who have superiority over you. And when we recognize that, there is peace. Confucius also supported the belief in filial piety, or the respect for parents and family above all else. This is why China still today has an intense system of honor within the family. Confucius also believed that in order to create an ideal state, a state that was peaceful, a state that functioned for the good of all people, everyone had a role to play. And that role might be small, but everyone has that responsibility. Out of this will come a practice in Chinese history called civil service. Civil servants were people that were trained to protect and make the good of the state. Really, it's a fancy term for government officials, but China put such a big emphasis on the specific moral obligation each person had that everyone really felt like they had a role to play. And that's truly a reflection of these Confucian ideas. Confucius also believed in the importance of education for all people, that those who are educated are going to succeed. But again, it's truly these ideas of virtue, peace, and kindness that make Confucianism remembered. Truly a foundation of Chinese society even today. However, not everyone agreed with this Confucian philosophy. It seemed to be a little too idealistic. And based on what we've talked about, that's kind of true. Yes, it would be nice if everyone would just recognize their place and get along and recognize that they have a role to play, but people, again, are lazy and selfish. Which is why another philosophy, legalism, became very popular in China. Legalism held that the nature of man is evil, and because of that evil, laws are required to maintain the good. Exactly like it sounds, it was a lot of harsh and strict laws that were meant to promote the peace and keep the peace. So Confucianism and legalism are on 2 ends of the spectrum. Confucianism holds that really men are good and eventually they'll work together for the good of the state. As legalism says, no, man is evil, we need laws to make sure the evil doesn't overtake us. Again, these aren't necessarily religions. These are worldviews, and they're a big part of Chinese society. And China will go back and forth between both of these ideas throughout its history. But from a more religious side, the prominent religion in China will be Taoism. Lao Zi, a contemporary philosopher of Confucius who rode around on a water buffalo, weird flex but okay, was far more concerned about the spiritual side of things, specifically advocating for a unity and harmony with nature. Lao Zi had a focus on Tao, or the way of the universe. This is the way. No, not to be confused with the way from The Mandalorian and Star Wars. This was simply the way people should live and the way they should fulfill their destiny, and it sought to find a lot of things like balance between nature and human life, balance between good and evil, light and darkness. The idea of yin and yang comes from Taoist beliefs. He also believed that because the world was so corrupt and immoral, that the best thing somebody could do was to separate themselves from it. That's why he advocated for so much meditation within nature. Taoism also recognizes that people are inherently lazy and inherently selfish and straight up mean to each other, which is why the best government is the one that governs the least. Taoism basically says, yeah, let people do whatever they want. Besides, power can corrupt. So if you don't give the government that much power, maybe people would actually live in peace and harmony together. So therefore, China has 3 very different worldviews that characterized it differently at different times. And from a Christian worldview, I think there's a lot of this that rings true for us too. Especially legalism, which explains our sinful nature and the need we have for laws and order. And yet Confucianism also shows the good in people. We do have good in us. While we don't always choose to act that way, humans can be quite good. It's a reflection of the God who created us. And Taoism does reflect the wonders of creation, the wonders of nature, which we as Christians recognize as gifts from our wonderful God. So in many ways, there's a lot of similarities here. Now, obviously, there's a difference in polytheism and monotheism and beliefs about salvation and all of that. But again, we see some fundamental truths about who humans are and what their role in the universe and in the world is. It still amazes me to this day how close so many of these civilizations are in their beliefs and in their actions. And China is just yet another example of a successful river valley civilization with very distinct worldviews that will be very successful within the ancient world. But as we mentioned, this dynastic cycle will only continue in China. And we're going to see the rise of several dynasties within the classical era, as well as the fall of some other dynasties later on in history. But that is a story for another day. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.